My cleaning lady stole my used condom to get pregnant, then filed for child support claiming I was the father. Now she's paying me instead. I bought my condo at 29 and worked 60 hours a week as a project manager at a logistics firm, so I hired a cleaning service the same week I moved in. The company sent a woman named Lorraine. She showed up Tuesdays and Fridays. She had a key because the service required it, and I was never home during her hours. My buddy Ike told me I was crazy for handing a stranger a key to my place. I told him the company was bonded and insured, and I'd been using them for a year without a single problem. Lorraine was the third employee they'd assigned me. The first two had been fine and they moved on. She took their slot, and for 4 months she did her job. Quiet, thorough. The place always smelled like lemons and floor polish when I got home. I'd come in at 8 in the evening, drop my keys in the bowl by the door, and the only sign anyone had been there at all was the smell and the sheets. Then small things started feeling off. The app tracked her hours, and her sessions were running 30 or 40 minutes long. My mail was in a different order than I'd left it. Books on the nightstand were shifted, the medicine cabinet rearranged. A drawer in the bedroom that I almost never opened looked like it had been closed at a slightly different angle than I'd left it. Things that could be explained by careful dusting but felt like more than dusting. I mentioned it once to my girlfriend Perry, and she told me I was overthinking it. We'd been together about 6 months. She stayed over most weekends, easy to be around, didn't ask for much, and I was probably the most settled I'd been in years. She said maybe Lorraine was just slow, maybe she was thorough, maybe I needed to stop noticing things that didn't matter. I let it go. 3 months later, I got served. A woman I had never slept with was claiming I fathered her 8-month-old baby, and she wanted child support. The name on the filing was Lorraine Keppel, my cleaning lady. I sat on my couch holding the paperwork, and my brain refused to process it. I had never touched this woman. I had never spoken more than 10 words to her in 7 months of her coming and going twice a week. She cleaned my condo while I was at work, and I paid her company through an app. I read the filing twice. I read it a third time. I poured a drink and left it on the counter and forgot about it for an hour. The address listed for the petitioner was a P.O. box in a part of the city I'd never been to. The exhibit attached was a photograph of a baby I had never seen, with eyes that were dark, like mine were dark, which meant nothing because half the babies on Earth have eyes like that. I called my lawyer Donnie immediately. He told me to calm down and asked if there was any chance at all, that I'd been with her. I told him absolutely not. I had never been alone in a room with her. He asked if there was any way she could have obtained biological material from me, and that's when it hit me, the trash. Perry stayed over on weekends. We used protection. I threw it in the bathroom can that Lorraine emptied every Tuesday and Friday. Donnie went quiet on the line. Then he asked me the question that ended the case before it started. He asked if I'd ever had a vasectomy. I told him yes, 3 years ago when I was 28, confirmed successful at the follow-up by my Dr. Shin. Donnie said this was going to be the shortest case of his career, and I should pull the records first thing in the morning. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch and looked at the bathroom door and tried to count how many used condoms had gone in that can over the 7 months Lorraine had been working in my home. I couldn't. I stopped trying. We went to the hearing 2 weeks later. Lorraine showed up with a lawyer in a charcoal suit. She didn't look at me once the whole time. Her lawyer presented the claim, said his client had been in a relationship with me, said I was the biological father avoiding responsibility. I had never had a conversation with this woman that lasted longer than me, saying the floors looked good, thanks. Donnie stood up and presented one piece of paper. My vasectomy confirmation from Shin, dated 3 full years before Lorraine ever stepped foot in my condo. He told the judge I was physically incapable of fathering a child and had been for over 36 months. Lorraine's lawyer asked for a recess. The judge said no. Donnie kept going. He presented the cleaning service records, the app logs, the key access, the hours she was alone in my home twice a week with no oversight. He told the judge the only possible way Lorraine could claim a biological connection was by retrieving discarded material from my personal waste without my knowledge or consent. He said it in plain words, in a plain voice, like he was reading a weather report. The judge took the medical records and looked at them for a long time. She set them down. She looked at the cleaning records. She set those down. Then she looked at Lorraine and asked her directly if she wanted to respond. Her lawyer leaned over and whispered to her. She did not say a word. She looked at the table in front of her, and her hand stayed flat on the surface like she was holding herself in place. The judge dismissed the paternity claim outright and granted Donnie's motion to refer the matter for criminal investigation. I walked out of the courtroom and sat in my car for 20 minutes. Ike called and asked how it went, and I told him he'd been right about the key. He didn't say I told you so. He just said, tell me what you need. I told him I needed a beer and a normal conversation, and he set his place at 6. I called the cleaning company that afternoon and told them what happened. They fired Lorraine that day. I thought it was over. It wasn't. A week later, Donnie called and said he'd pulled Lorraine's employment file from the company through a formal records request, and what he found made the whole thing worse. The address on her application was a vacant lot. He'd driven out there himself just to make sure. The social security number she'd used to pass the background check belonged to a relative, not her. She'd walked into that job under a fake identity, and she'd planned it that way before she'd ever picked up a mop. Donnie said this woman didn't make a desperate mistake one afternoon. She'd built a system. She'd picked an industry that gave her a key to a stranger's home twice a week, and she'd built her invisibility into the application before her first day. I asked Donnie how she'd passed the background check. He said the relative whose social security number she'd used was a real person with a clean record, an aunt or a cousin, he wasn't sure which yet, and the cleaning company's vendor for background checks didn't pull photos. They pulled numbers. The numbers came back clean. Lorraine walked through the gate. He said this was a known weakness in the industry, but knowing it was a weakness didn't fix it. He said companies built their margins on cheap, fast hiring, and the cost of any single bad hire was something they were willing to absorb until the lawsuit started. That night, I sat down with Perry on the couch and told her everything Donnie found. She listened until I was done, and then she got quiet. Not the regular kind of quiet, the kind where something is building behind a person's eyes. She asked me how long Lorraine had been going through our trash. She didn't say my trash. She said our. That one word changed the shape of it. Lorraine had been cleaning my place for 7 months. Perry had been staying over for 6 of them. Perry stood up and walked to the bathroom doorway and just looked at it. She said she felt sick knowing that woman had been handling her things and going through the can next to the toilet, and she'd had no idea. I put my hand on her shoulder and told her this wasn't her fault, and it wasn't mine either. She leaned in for a second and then pulled back and said she just needed a minute. I gave her the minute. I gave her as many as she needed. She didn't stay over the next weekend. She told me it wasn't about me, it was about the place, and she needed a few days to let it stop feeling like Lorraine had been sitting in her own bathroom. I told her I understood. The weekend after that she came over, but she stood in the bathroom doorway for a long time before she went in, the way you'd stand at the edge of a pool you weren't sure about. I noticed, but I didn't say anything because I didn't have anything useful to say. I'd grown up in that bathroom for the last few years. She'd grown into it for the last 6 months. Lorraine had been in it twice a week the whole time, and neither of us had known what she was doing in there. 2 days later, Lorraine showed up at my building. She was sitting on the bench by the entrance when I came home from work, eyes red, smaller looking than I remembered. She stood up when she saw me and said, "Please, just 5 minutes." She was begging. My whole body went tight. I stopped 10 feet away and told her she couldn't be here. She started talking fast like she'd been rehearsing. She said she knew what she'd done was wrong, but she had a baby, and if I went through with this, she'd lose everything. Was that what I wanted? To take a baby's mother away? For 1 second, less than a second, I saw a scared woman standing on a sidewalk. Then I thought about the vacant lot on her application, the relative's social security number, the way she'd built her invisibility before she'd ever met me. This wasn't desperation. This was a test. She wanted to see if guilt worked better on me than a courtroom had. I told her to leave before I called the police. She stood there for a moment looking at me like she was waiting for me to change my mind. Then she said it almost under her breath, "You're going to regret this," and walked away down the sidewalk without looking back. I went inside and locked the door and called Donnie. He filed a restraining order the next morning. 2 days after that, Donnie called and read me a letter from Lorraine's lawyer. The letter claimed I'd been in a consensual personal relationship with her and that the cleaning service arrangement had been a cover story we had agreed on to keep things private. It said she'd file a defamation countersuit if I pursued any civil claim, and that her reputation and her ability to find work were being damaged by my legal actions. Donnie read it in the same calm voice he used for everything, and when he finished, he said it was a bluff designed to scare me into settling. I knew every word in that letter was a lie. What rattled me was that she was willing to put those lies on paper, sign her name to them, and say them in front of a judge if she had to. She wasn't going to deny what she did. She was going to rewrite the whole story and paint me as the liar. That was the first time I felt real doubt, not about the truth, about whether the truth was enough on its own. The next morning, I came out of the shower and Perry was sitting on the edge of the bed holding the letter. She must have seen it on the counter and read it before I'd finished drying off. Her face was completely flat, like someone had turned the lights off behind her eyes. She said she knew it wasn't true, but other people wouldn't know that, and Lorraine was going to say it to anyone who'd listen. I sat down next to her and told her every word in that letter was a lie, and she said, "I know, but how does anyone else know that?" There was nothing I could say to that because she was right. Lorraine wasn't fighting me in one room anymore. She was trying to get into every corner of my life, my relationship, my reputation, the way people looked at me when I walked into a coffee shop. Perry put the letter down and walked into the other room, and I sat there in a towel and felt the temperature in my own body drop. The next afternoon, Ike called me on my drive home. We did the small talk, and then he got quiet and said, "Maybe you should just let this go. You won the paternity thing. Why keep fighting?" Something inside me snapped. I have never yelled at Ike in 15 years of friendship, but I said, "Because she walked into my home and took something out of my own trash, and I'm supposed to just let her walk away." The words came out louder and harder than I meant them to. There was silence on the other end for what felt like forever. Then Ike said, real quiet, "You're right. I'm sorry. Keep going." I pulled into my parking spot and sat there gripping the wheel. Ike didn't deserve that. He'd been the one who warned me about the key. He'd been the first call I made out of that courtroom. But I was tired in a way I'd never been tired before. And the letter from Lorraine's lawyer had cracked something I didn't know was holding me up. A week after that, the call came that changed everything. It was late, almost midnight. I almost didn't answer. Donnie's voice was different this time. Not careful, more like he was holding something back. He said the criminal investigator had pulled Lorraine's records from her last 2 cleaning jobs before mine. He said, "You're not her first target." The room felt like it tilted. Donnie said she'd filed a paternity claim against another client 2 years ago. Different company, different city. The man had settled out of court for $40,000 because he didn't want to fight it. She'd done this before. I sat in the dark holding the phone, not saying anything, and I felt the whole thing shift under me like the ground had changed shape. $40,000. Some other guy in some other city had paid her to go away because he didn't want to deal with what I was dealing with right now. After she got that money, she'd moved on, found a new company, and done the whole thing again. I wasn't a one-time desperation. I was the next name on a list. Donnie said he was reaching out to the previous victim's lawyer first thing in the morning. I told him to do it. I told him to get everything. After we hung up, I sat in the dark and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not hope exactly. Certainty. Lorraine had built her whole strategy on one assumption, that men would be too embarrassed or too tired to fight back. She banked on silence. She banked on shame. She found guys who'd rather pay than stand in a room and explain how their cleaning lady had stolen their trash. For at least one guy, it had worked. The next week, Donnie did what he did best. He got the previous victim's lawyer on the phone. He got the settlement records, the original paternity filing, a notarized statement detailing exactly how Lorraine had done it the first time. Same script, same setup, different state. The previous victim had used a different cleaning company, but the company had a similar key access policy and similar tracking gaps. Donnie said the man on the other end of the call had been quiet for almost a full minute when he heard there was someone else, then said one word, "Finally." Then Donnie did one more thing I hadn't expected. He sent the entire package, the vasectomy records, the fraudulent employment application, the previous victim's notarized statement, the restraining order, the threats Lorraine had made outside my building, to Lorraine's own lawyer by certified mail, as a courtesy disclosure of evidence Donnie said he intended to use. 3 days later, Lorraine's lawyer called Donnie and asked for a private meeting. Not a hearing, not a deposition, a meeting in his office. Donnie went. He called me from the parking lot afterward. He said Lorraine's lawyer hadn't known about the previous victim. He hadn't known about the fake address. He hadn't known about the stolen social security number. His own client had lied to him about every single piece of it, and once Donnie laid the file out on his desk in front of him, him. He understood exactly what was about to happen to her. The criminal track wasn't going to be a slow, hard prosecution anymore. The fraud charges from the fake identity application were a separate, easier track that the DA could pick up immediately. The previous victim's lawyer was already preparing a parallel claim now that Lorraine had been located. Lorraine wasn't facing one long fight. She was facing a stack of overlapping problems, and the moment any one of them moved, the rest would follow. Donnie said her lawyer wanted to know what it would take to make this go away. Donnie told him exactly what it would take. Full withdrawal of the paternity claim with prejudice. A signed affidavit admitting the trash, the application fraud, the false consensual relationship story. Restitution paid directly to me through a structured agreement secured against her future wages. A non-disclosure on her side only. She couldn't talk about me. I could talk about her all I wanted. And the previous victim's claim handled separately, with no interference from her side. Her lawyer asked for 48 hours. He needed to talk to his client. He also needed, he said, to figure out whether he was going to keep representing her. Donnie hung up and called me and told me all of it. I sat at my counter with the phone against my ear and didn't say anything for a long time. Donnie said, she's going to sign. She doesn't have a choice. The information itself is what's holding her now. Every direction she runs, there's another piece already there waiting. I asked him what would happen if she said no. He said if she said no, the previous victim's claim would land in a week, the criminal fraud track would file the following week, and within a month, she'd be dealing with 3 separate legal problems instead of one negotiated settlement. He said no lawyer in the country was going to let her say no. 48 hours is a long time when you're sitting and waiting. I went to work. I came home. I didn't tell Perry what was happening because I didn't want to put it in her head until it was real. Ike called twice, and I let it go to voicemail because I couldn't talk about it without spiraling. I cooked dinner the second night just to have something to do with my hands. I burned the rice. I ate it anyway because throwing it out felt like admitting the night was bigger than I was. I lay in bed and counted the hours backward to the call from Donnie and forward to the deadline Lorraine's lawyer had asked for, and the whole time my brain kept running the same loop. She signs or she doesn't, she signs or she doesn't, and there's nothing you can do in either direction until she answers. At hour 40, almost exactly, Donnie called. He said her lawyer had called back and accepted every single condition. The next morning I told Perry what was happening. She was at the sink filling a glass of water, and she set it down on the counter and just stood there for a second. Then she walked across the room and put her arms around me and didn't say anything for a long time. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet, but her face was steady. She said, "So it's done." I told her it was done. She nodded once and went and finished her water. That afternoon, Ike called and asked how it ended. I told him she signed. He was quiet for a second, and then he said, "So no trial." I told him no trial. He said, "That's better. She'd have spent 2 years dragging it out, and you'd have spent 2 years watching her do it." I told him I knew. He said, "You should change the locks anyway." I told him I was already on it. Lorraine signed the affidavit on a Thursday. I have a copy of it in a folder in my filing cabinet. The structured agreement was set up the following Monday through Donnie's office. The first payment hit my account 2 weeks after that. It wasn't enormous. It didn't need to be. It was steady. It was monthly. It was secured against her wages from whatever job she was going to find next, and it would be there for years. The previous victim's lawyer was handling his own claim separately, and Donnie said quietly that the man would probably recover the $40,000 he'd paid her 2 years before, and probably more. Lorraine's lawyer dropped her the same week she signed. The criminal fraud track moved forward on its own without me having to do anything. I never had to step into another courtroom. The whole thing ended in a private office on a Thursday afternoon while I was at work, on the strength of a stack of paper Donnie put in front of her lawyer that her lawyer hadn't been allowed to see. Once he saw it, the case wasn't a case anymore. It was a sequence of consequences she was going to walk through one at a time, and the only way to slow them down was to sign. So she signed. The night the agreement was finalized, Perry came over with takeout from the place we used to go to early on, when nothing about either of us was complicated. We didn't talk about Lorraine. We talked about a show she'd been watching. We talked about a trip her coworker had taken. We talked about nothing important, and it was the best conversation I'd had in months. Ike came over the next weekend and dropped takeout on my counter and told me he was proud of me for not folding. I told him he'd been right about the key. He said yeah, but I'd been right about everything that came after. I changed the locks the day after Lorraine signed. I changed the cleaning service the same day. The new company had a different policy. The employees never held a key. They worked in a window I was home for. I sat at the table the first week the new crew came through and watched them work and felt nothing about it, which was the point. The first check from Lorraine arrived on a Tuesday. I didn't open the envelope for 3 days. It sat on the counter by the door under a pair of sunglasses and a takeout menu I kept meaning to throw away. When I finally opened it, I stood there in my hallway and stared at the number for a minute. It wasn't a number that fixed anything. It wasn't a number that made what she did smaller. It was just a number on a check made out to me, signed with her real name. I think that was the part I'd been avoiding for 3 days. Her real name on a piece of paper she had to send me every month for years with no way out. I put the check in the deposit slot at my bank on the way home from work. Every month since, the same envelope, the same number. I don't think about her between checks. The locks are new. The check comes the first of every month. I don't open it the same day anymore.